set you free. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the TechDirt podcast. Today, we are going to discuss the thing online that everyone loves to hate, and that is advertising. While people have bitched and whined about advertising for ages, there seems to be something in the air lately, making advertising even more ripe for mocking. Just a few weeks ago, Jerry Seinfeld, upon accepting an award from the advertising industry, used the opportunity to mock the entire industry.
I just want to enjoy the commercial. I want to get the thing. We know the product is going to stink. We know that. Because we live in the world and we know that everything stinks. We all believe, hey, maybe this one won't stink. We are a hopeful species. Stupid, but hopeful. But we're happy in that moment between the commercial and the purchase. And I think spending your life trying to dupe innocent people out of hard-won earnings to buy useless, low-quality, misrepresented items and services is an excellent use of your energy.
A few months earlier, Ethan Zuckerman wrote up a piece apologizing for what he called the internet's original sin, online advertising. In particular, he apologized for creating the world's first pop-up ad while working for Tripod, an early homepage hosting service. The article is incredibly compelling, noting not only the poor performance of ads, but also because of that poor performance, companies who want to show better performance are encouraged to collect tons of data on users using questionable surveillance. In response to the hatred and general ineffectiveness of banner advertising, many in the media world have shifted over to a concept called native advertising, which has many definitions but is most commonly, if incorrectly, compared to advertorial, in which a publication hands over some sort of editorial function to the advertiser, allowing them to create content that shows up in the same place as the regular non-ad content. Of course, it's not just advertorial. Product placement can be native, general sponsorship can be native, but it's been called advertorial and many people really dislike it or even fear it. Take, for example, John Oliver, who recently did a whole segment on native advertising, which he mocked ruthlessly.
Even the New York Times is now embracing this. They had a recent feature on their website about women in prison, which looked like a serious piece of journalism, but was actually a paid post promoting season 2 of Orange is the New Black. And here's the thing, as far as native advertising goes, that's about as good as it gets. The reporting is real, and the sponsored branding was minimal. But it is still an ad. It's like hearing the one Katy Perry song that you like. You think, sure, this is the best possible iteration of Katy Perry, but it still feels wrong to be listening to this. You're gonna hear me roar, louder, louder than a lion. It's a good song. It's a good song. There's a 12-year-old girl inside me who is empowered by that song. The problem is sponsors aren't always going to be as benign as Orange is the New Black. Sometimes it's going to be a company like Chevron, who recently sponsored a piece in the Times about how our energy needs are changing. And spoiler alert, the notion that they're changing because we f***ed up the earth thanks to companies like Chevron is not the conclusion of the article.
And while I find that I almost always agree with Oliver, on this I have to push back. Not because he's wrong that ham-fisted native advertising is horrible, but for the fact that he assumes that all such advertising is likely to be just so ham-fisted. Much of it is that problematic, and that is the real problem. But it's important to separate out bad, ham-fisted execution from the underlying idea. Good, well-done advertising can be beneficial to everyone. Some people automatically or even reflexively push back on that claim, but it's true. People love good advertising. The number of people who watch the Super Bowl for the ads, or those who watch them all on YouTube later, show that this is true. Those ads are entertaining, and they match what the target market is actually looking for. So I think it's time that we redefine native advertising not as hideous advertorial, but rather as advertising that is also content that people actually want. On TechDirt, one of the most visited posts we did last year was a sponsored post, but it was written by us on a topic that our audience cared about. And while it was clearly marked as sponsored, not a single person cared or commented negatively on that fact. The thing that people fear and worry about is trickery. Nearly all of the complaints about native advertising, including in the John Oliver piece, are about how people are somehow tricked into looking at an ad that they think is not an ad. To me, that would not be good advertising at all. Good advertising has to be clear, and it has to be content that people want by itself, even when they know it's advertising. In fact, we found that when done right, people will even celebrate or thank the advertiser for supporting content they love, but it has to be done right. And yet, whenever I suggest this, I still have people who reflexively argue that no, advertising must be bad. We see new services like Ello come on the scene with a pitch that they won't have any ads, and people get excited. We hear people say things like, if you're not paying, you're the product, even though some of the most hated services in the world are the ones that we actually pay for, like your cable service or your cell phone service. So I'd like to discuss this idea that what we need to do is get past the idea that all ads are bad and rather focus on the fact that bad ads are bad and that there's a better way to do advertising by making content that people actually want. Here to discuss this with me, once again, are Hirsch Reddy and Dennis Yang.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, how are you? So, am I crazy? Are all ads bad?
Well, I don't think we could say all ads are bad. However, I sort of lean more towards John Oliver when it comes to advertorials. I'm trying to think of a scenario in which an advertorial would be something that is non-deceptive and still genuine and still has the same amount of integrity as a non-sponsored story. I think if you could probably convince me that there's give me an example of a piece of content.
So, for example, right? So the post that we had on TechDirt that was a sponsored post that got a lot of attention was a story by an advocacy group called the App Developers Alliance. And what they had done is they had interviewed a startup entrepreneur who was facing a lawsuit from a patent troll. And it was a video in which he talks about the fact that he's had to hire more lawyers than engineers for his startup. And we put that video up with a discussion about it and the problem of patent trolls and the need for patent reform and all that. And it was all very clearly sponsored. They had created the video and it was all noted that it was them. And it was a really interesting story that people liked.
See, I still have a problem with it. In that case, it's not the content because we both happen to agree with the message that's coming out there. Here's what I think the problem is. Let's say we've got a big portal with millions of people coming to the portal. You know, I don't know what your numbers are, but I'm sure it's pretty high. And that specific story is a story that I think you would have run on an ordinary day with or without sponsorship.
Sure.
So there's this thing like, why would a sponsor pay for something that might be surfaced anyways? So the feeling in the audience is a little bit of skepticism. Like, what does that buy you in addition to the coverage that Mike Masnick would give you anyways, because he's interested in this? Obviously, every patent story you do isn't a sponsored story.
Right, but I mean, there's a scarcity, right? I mean, we see, probably 300 to 500 stories a week that we would like to do, and yet we publish about 60 to 70. So, would we have gotten to that story? Maybe, maybe not. So, the one thing that does in that case is it effectively pushes it to the front of the line and says, you should definitely do this story. And so we did cover that story.
Right, but I think that's the fine line that people are concerned about, right? Like, which
Sure.
is essentially, are you still genuine to what you would have said anyway, or is the advertiser somehow paying for a perspective?
Right. And, from my perspective, I think the trust of our audience is kind of the biggest thing for us. And so if we were doing posts like that suddenly started to talk about like, patents are great and, yay, patent trolling, people would call us out on it immediately and it would become really clear. And so, we would never do a sponsorship campaign like that because that's, that would destroy everything, right?
Right. I mean, it feels like more along the lines of something like an endorsement, right? So
sure.
Like, Mike, I know you are a fan of a number of technology products and you would happily stand behind telling everyone that you liked, certain watches or phones or whatnot. And the fact is that people trust you and they trust your voice, and they hopefully trust who you're working with, right? Which is what you're trying to capitalize
I'm
on.
going to tell you, though, as a consumer, I'm actually in the market right now to replace my aging DSLR with another camera, right? It might be a mirrorless camera this time. And so I'm actually reading a ton of reviews. I'm watching a lot of YouTube channels. And there are certain channels that don't have the disclaimer that says we didn't take money from Sony or Canon or Nikon.
Right.
And then there are other ones that just prominently say, hey, look, we never take any money.
Right.
And this is, guess which channel I trust a lot more. And there's definitely those channels that even though they don't say that they're sponsored, I don't know if they get free cameras or something like that, but they're very much fanboys of one or the other.
But
brands.
Again, that goes back to the point that I made, which is that involves trickery, right? And so I think that there's this feeling that anytime you're doing advertising, it's going to at some point involve trickery. And I think that you can get beyond that, right? Where things are really upfront and things are clear. And so, the other thing, going back to the App Developers Alliance, the other thing that they get out of that is not just that we ran that story, but that it was clearly done by the App Developers Alliance. And so we're highlighting the fact that they agree with TechDirt, and therefore the TechDirt community recognizes that is a group that they should pay attention to as well. So they get branding benefits from that as well. Beyond just having their video and their story show on the site, it actually helps them because our audience then says, oh, this is an interesting organization. And that's why in those cases, we're not going to do that with an organization that we don't trust and we don't think our community should trust, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about something like reviews are a different thing, right? Reviews are, that gets into really sketchy territory, and people are definitely worried about that. But again, when people are getting free stuff or getting paid for reviews, then there's trickery involved, right?
Right. I think the inherent kind of confusion, I think, when advertising applies as a business model is, I like to kind of compare it to a 3-body system in physics, right? With a 2-body system, it's you can predict basically the motion of that system. But once you have 3 bodies that are connected with a string, that's what's called chaotic motion. And essentially, the advertising business model is advertisers, the publisher, and the audience. It's 3 parties. And of course, it can work well together. But at the end of the day, I think that's that kind of uneasy feeling that it places into the consumer's hearts.
And I think it's completely fair to say that in most cases, that relationship gets messed up, right? Yes. And so it's easy to get from the point where you say, because it is in most cases, I'm just not going to trust it at all, and I'm going to say that all advertising is bad. Right. Part of the argument that I'm trying to make is one to push everyone, and that includes the advertisers and the publishers, towards better, more transparent advertising where they're really clear about it, and they're looking for cases like those examples that I gave where it's all about creating content that actually makes sense for the community and that the community is going to like, and that everyone is in agreement is a good thing.
Right. And I think that what we're gaining from it is it allows certain things to exist that otherwise would not have a business to exist, right? So a simple, straightforward system would be, consumers of TechDirt content would pay for TechDirt content. And I don't think that's...
Some of them do.
And some of them do. And, Consumer Reports, they are very adamant about not having advertisers, and they create a product. And that's the type of product that is created in that system.
Right.
So, I just think it's interesting, and I agree with you in that we can't throw out advertising as a whole, but we do how do we actually get publishers to act in a good way? Like what are the things that they should do?
Right. And there was I mentioned in the opening that that social network Ello that got all this attention, and they wanted to be sort of the Facebook without advertising. And in their terms of service, they basically say we'll never do advertising, and there were a bunch of other stuff, and people sort of ran to them like, oh, this is great, and that same line comes up again about if you're not paying for it, you're the product. But at some point they have to be able to make money.
Right. So how are they going to make money?
Well, that's not entirely clear. They want to charge extra for higher level features. But every time people have tried to do that, then you come across the limitations for that. And
well, let me just step in there with regards to Ello. I think there's certainly there's a universe of possibilities for social networks that people haven't explored. And I'll give you an example of a very popular property online where it's neither advertising funded nor paid directly for by users, and it's still worth billions of dollars. It's a game called League of Legends, and it's made by Riot. And you can play the game without paying a cent. Sure. But what they give you is like aesthetic bonuses. Like your avatar has a uniform. You can have a bigger profile picture. Those are the kinds of things a social network could do.
Right. But,
right. And those premium things aren't exactly like a subscription. I think it's a subscription that users are sometimes allergic to. But these little premium buys of, hey, I just want to buy the Halloween skin for my landing page, or I just want to have a bigger profile photo, or maybe larger videos, high res videos. Those kinds of things. I think users are pretty open to paying for those kinds of things, right? So it's not quite a subscription, and in a sense, they are paying for the service, but it feels like a different kind of a transaction.
But
so
it is a freemium. It's a freemium product.
It's a freemium product, but you can't judge it by the failure of previous paid for social networking services like app.net, right? I think there's a possibility that people will figure out a way to monetize online services without advertising. There is some places.
And nowhere am I saying that advertising is the only business model. In fact, I don't think it is, and I encourage people to do all sorts of business models, and we experiment with lots of different business models. But what bothers me is this idea that advertising has to be considered a bad business model, or a dangerous business model, or one where it somehow is at odds with the users of the site. And that I have a real problem with, because
I'll agree with you there. I don't think advertising is automatically evil or anything like that.
But this idea that that if there's advertising that you're the product because they're selling the data on you, I think that's bad when there is too much data collection and too much. There becomes this huge focus on, well, if we just have more data, then we can more accurately target the ads. And I think that's an exaggeration. And I think that also leads to bad behavior on almost everyone's part, because it leads to, excessive tracking. It leads to bad targeted advertising, which just creeps the hell out of people.
Right.
Doesn't make them feel any better. And it's, it's not advertising that they want. It's advertising that they say, wait a second, why are you tracking me to this level?
Right. I mean, that said, I think that a properly targeted ad is really effective and useful for the end consumer, right?
A properly targeted ad, but right. So that assumes that you're going to properly target the ad just by collecting all this data, and that might happen, but I don't think they're there yet, right? I mean,
I think there's a difference between properly targeting an ad and being creepy,
right?
And I think that we, as in society, when you're walking around, if I don't know, Mike, if I don't know you, and I walk up to you and say, hey, how is such and such? How was your vacation last week? And I knew exactly where you were going. That's creepy, because you don't know how I know this.
Right.
Right. And I think that is kind of what ad targeting feels like right now, which is, why am I being shown this ad? And why is it creepily know what to show me?
Well, the stuff about location doesn't creep me out as much as like a lot of people. The stuff that irritates me with these kinds of targeted advertising is that they track all that stuff and they still don't actually advertise very well, right? Like, right. After I buy a camera from Amazon shows me more ads for cameras, as though I just bought one. He must be in the market for more. No, I just bought one. I don't need another one. It happens with shoes. It happens with a lot of stuff. And they're the portal that I bought the item from. They should know I just bought it. I'm not in the market for another one. So that's one kind of bad kind of advertising. But I'll give you another one. Like, Facebook is basically advertising driven. And I get shown ads for, hey, do you want to join a school and get a divinity degree? And they have the information on my religion thing that shows that I'm not going to be interested in going to divinity school. I've entered into my religion thing. I say that I'm a follower of the Norse religion. Right? That's obviously BS, right? Like, how many?
Yeah, but you need an algorithm that can determine sarcasm.
All you have to do is you have to just look and see. Does it say the word Christian there? Like, if it doesn't say the word Christian there, it doesn't have to be like this really complicated regular expression parser or something like that. It's just literally just look, and they don't do that much. It's strange when you get those kinds of ads, but. I don't. If an anonymous algorithm kind of knows my rough whereabouts, am I in Sweden right now? Am I in Northern California? That doesn't creep me out as much as I think it creeps out a lot of people in the press.
The location stuff, the general location stuff, is not as big a deal, and it's funny actually because my ISP at home is Sonic.net, which is based in Santa Rosa, and for some reason, so I always get these ads thinking I'm up in Santa Rosa. which is just, I'm like, yeah, you guys are not that good at this. But there are other things too where, like, I mean, you always see it now where you visit an airline's website or a hotel's website, and then suddenly every ad you see is for that airline or hotel. And you're like, okay, I get it. You guys are tracking me all over the internet. And that just,
Do a search on Amazon, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll come up on YouTube. It's crazy.
It comes up everywhere. The Amazon advertising is incredible, but
Yeah, and I think that like retargeting basically is the in tactic right now for online ads, and I think that a lot of people are seeing it. A lot of people are annoyed with it, and I think there's an opportunity for someone to innovate on the fact that, okay, now that we know you're searching for a flight to Cabo and you're searching for a camera, let's figure that out and actually deliver you an ad that is more relevant than the exact thing you just bought. Right?
Sure.
And I think that's coming, and I hope that people are working on that. And in terms of like for Facebook, like they know so much about, like there's so much data about me. I want them to target an ad to me that tells me exactly like what I should be looking for right now.
What would be really valuable to me is them figuring out, based on my profiles and preferences, these really long tail pieces of content that I can't find for myself. I'm thinking about songs, books, even like consumer goods that I wouldn't even think of buying.
Yeah. It's like they know you so well, so use that information.
but do they really? I mean, again, it's just that.
In other words, what I mean is I don't need to be sold a Goodyear tire. I already know they exist, and I'm going to go to the tire store and buy the cheapest or best tire, whatever my preference is. What I really want is these little unknown things, right? Like a headphone that has some kind of longer battery life, or like figure out something about me, right? Like I like science fiction books. Here's a crazy science fiction book from Iceland that I wouldn't have heard of, like something like that. Like,
but and there are attempts to do that, and right, Pandora tries to like find music that you might like based on this or that. But I to some extent I think that there's this perhaps overbelief that the algorithm will solve all, right? So let me take a step back from this and say, if you look at, going back to the TechDirt example, I'm not always going to use TechDirt, but that's the one I know the best, obviously. So, right? I mean, if you want to advertise on TechDirt, the idea that you need all this data or that I should have to track my users to understand who they are, and we get these questions all the time about like, what is the income level of the average TechDirt user and all this stuff. And it's like, you don't need to know that, because think about what we write about and what we cover, right? I mean, we're covering these technology, innovation, policy, legal issues. You can pretty much figure out the type of people who are going to be reading that. And if you're trying to reach that kind of audience, innovators who are interested in policy-related stuff, copyright, patents, innovation, then this is the right audience for you, and you don't need all this data. But we're getting to this point where people get so focused on that algorithmic aspect and this idea that, data will give us the answer and the ability to do this perfect advertising, that we still get hit with that all the time. And so I'm bothered by that aspect, and when people get so focused on the data-driven side of it that they forget the common sense side of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, I think, if you think about the fact that you have a limited amount of real estate on your website to sell to advertisers, right? You have a certain amount of, what do you call it in the industry? Probably like impressions, say, right? Inventory, right? You got a certain amount of inventory, and you're trying to get the maximum price for it as the content creator, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the most price you're going to get for your inventory is going to be when you can when you can target something so well that the purchase probability is high, right?
It's the reverse, honestly. It's actually the opposite of that, because what happens is the guys who want the data are also the guys who are trying to knock down the price. It gets to this whole thing. They're looking for the absolute cheapest ad that they can buy that will get the marginal purchase, right? The ones who are willing to pay what we consider personally reasonable rates, are the ones who are just like, oh yeah, this is a cool audience that we want to reach because we understand that, these things are important, patent reform or, whatever it might be that we understand are important, and therefore we want to reach this audience, and therefore, here, take this check.
Right. Well, here's the kinds of things I'm talking about. I don't even think you necessarily need a lot of data to target specific kinds of things. But you were saying, okay, hey, our audience comes here because they're interested in tech policy and technology and things like that. I think you can use algorithms to find certain things that are one step removed from that, right? And say like, okay, people who are interested in tech are probably maybe interested in buying a Tesla, or they'd probably be interested in buying a smartwatch, going a step beyond. And then once you've gone that step beyond and discovered these categories, going maybe a step beyond that as well and saying, hey, look, I can sell a higher piece of inventory here, not in that great a volume, but maybe a smaller volume for this specific smartwatch that is an open platform smartwatch that is sold from this no-name kickstarted small company. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like you have to do a little bit of processing on the content that's there, right?
Sure.
And I think that's what I'm more getting at. It's not so much as targeted to the user, so much as targeted to the content. When you say people who come to this kind of content are going to be these kinds of users, so target this kind of stuff.
Right, and I would argue that would be very effective advertising, right? Because it's not creepy, because it's not about tracking all the users and spying on their behavior, but it's recognizing that it's I'm not saying don't target, right? I'm just saying you don't necessarily have to target exactly what you were saying, target on the content as opposed to target on the users themselves, because when you target on the users, it's creepy. When you target on the content, then you're going to get a match, and it's not going to be creepy, and it's going to be things that people actually do want.
Right.
Right. And I think the difficulty there is finding the right advertisers to match the right publishers.
Yeah. Right? And again, this is just personal experience, right? So when you're talking to advertisers, when you're talking to advertising agencies in particular, and I'm
right,
just
they usually have one client they're trying to push.
Speak negatively about advertising agencies, and what it is part of it is that you're just going through 6 different levels, right? Because there's the big ad agency, there's the little ad agency, there's the digital agency, there's the marketing department at the company, there's maybe a network that you're dealing with, and all of these things. And at some point, no matter how much you can convince someone that target the content, do something good that people will like and find it interesting and amazing, what it comes back to is that somebody somewhere in that process, a very junior person who just graduated from college, has a spreadsheet, and they're going to pop out and they're going to say, well, I have this spreadsheet and I need to fill in all these numbers, and so I need data on your audience to fill in these numbers, and then I'm going to come out with something that spits out something that says that your ads are worth half a penny or something crazy like that. And people get so focused on the data aspect that then there's so much pressure to do the creepy things and to spy on your
the measurable
users.
things. I mean, I think that
but the measurable stuff is often the creepy stuff.
Sure, and I think the advent of online advertising has really brought a lot of measurable and quantifiable metrics to the ad industry.
Yeah, but how much of that is actually useful, right? I mean, you're still back in the same spot that you're at the beginning, where people said, I know that half my ad budget is wasted. People still say that.
They still say it, but I guess there are more opportunities now to measure, conversion and user acquisition, and it's still really difficult to measure the efficacy of a brand campaign. But there are more ways to do it now than before. So,
That makes sense.
Yeah, I guess, but I'm still not convinced. I mean, I think people buy into it a lot more than the reality is, and then people think that the data tells them something that it doesn't really tell them in reality.
I wonder if there's the possibility of an economic opportunity here for a company to basically say, hey, we're in the business of actually asking you to provide us data, and what we give you in return is that we will sell your data to advertisers so you get better advertisements.
Yeah, I mean,
has anyone ever done that?
There have been attempts at that, and it just doesn't work because people don't want to do it in the first place, right? I mean, they already have this distaste for advertising, and even though the idea is that if you do that, you're going to get better advertising out of it.
I mean, at a very high level, when you sign up for like a mail order catalog, you're essentially asking for that exact thing to happen, right?
Yeah, or even something like Groupon, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's effectively what you're doing is you're saying, okay,
send me things to buy, or
in this location, yeah,
right. And so, there are cases of that, but, they approach it in a very different way.
Right. I mean, the thing that I wonder is, at some point, will kind of advertising outlive its usefulness in terms of, we're now in an age where you can find and discover products and goods and services that, without advertising, right?
It's very difficult, I think, though.
We're getting there, right? It's better than, say, 20 years ago.
No, here's what I think the way the finding process is working. The finding process is such that you get funneled towards the people that are willing to pay the most. If you don't do a bunch of research on your own, I think it's fairly difficult to find the out of the way things. right? The most popular books, the most popular music, that's pushed a lot. You actually have to find your way to a subreddit or some other kind
but I
of
think
community.
that it's much easier now than it was before.
Sure. Right. I mean, because like today, communities are popping up everywhere, so you can find a community around anything, whereas that wasn't necessarily the case, even 5 years ago, but definitely 20 years ago.
I mean, try shopping for a camera 20 years ago and discussing all the different options that are not available.
Yeah.
Right? Product choice is not available. Information is not as available. So we're moving towards an era where
You kind of need
ads
to know
are
what
less
questions
needed.
to ask, though. You need to know what
Yeah,
questions
but-
to ask to
but-
get to those communities.
But even, not even so. I mean, the more you research, the more you find them. I mean, whenever I've found like a new product that I wanted to research, as you start researching it, you discover those communities. It doesn't take too long.
yeah.
But anyways, we're running out of time, so let's come up with some final thoughts here. And which one of you is more eager to?
What do you think? What would be my final thought here? Dennis, you go.
I mean, I think that the thought about the fact that product choice and product discovery is more easily accessible nowadays kind of makes me wonder at what point marketers will stop focusing on kind of where to place their ads and focus more on how to adequately describe their products. And, I mean, word of mouth advertising is still one of the best ways to do it. And the best way to get good at word of mouth is to build a great product. So
Right.
I have a utopian vision of a world in which, you really can build a better mousetrap and the world beats a path to your door, which we do know today does not quite happen.
Yeah.
I think probably the most interesting thing moving forward will probably be, like you guys mentioned, sort of the transformation of perspective of users to sort of start thinking about things that are very advertising-like as not advertisements at all, but sort of services. So like Kickstarter surfacing different products to you that you can fund or Groupon, or even just like something like Goodreads, where you rate a bunch of books and then Goodreads, which is owned by Amazon, suggests other books for you. And you look at that as a benefit, not even as advertising. So I think those kinds of things are really useful. And if someone can figure out how to bring that to content portals, to websites, that will be very interesting, where you almost want to opt into this kind of cross-portal network because it surfaces great stuff for you based on all the other content portals you go to. If someone can figure out that, I think there'll be a lot of value there.
Yeah, and so my final thoughts, just sort of building on it, is that's exactly where I hope that the world is going. Where it's not even that people don't look at it as advertising; it's that they actually actively seek out this kind of content because it's valuable. And I think that everyone has to recognize that that's where these things are going, especially on the marketer's side, rather than focus on trying to shove an annoying, boring, intrusive message down everyone's throat. Figure out the places and the ways that they can present what they're trying to offer, to people who actually want it in a format that people actually want it. And then, as you said, people don't even think of it as advertising, but they have to get over this hurdle where there's this idea that it's bad. And on the user side, I think to some extent they have to recognize that these things, when done right, and again with the huge caveat that it's very often not done right, that these things can be good as well. And so I hope that's where we're heading, and we'll see. But anyways, Dennis, Hirsch, once again, thanks for a great conversation, and we'll be back again soon with another Tech Dirt podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm inclined to agree. Listen, we live in an age of instant information, so isn't it strange that things have been hidden away from us? Governments think we need to gain their trust, but it's the other way around. Just take a look. Nothing tells us more than raw data does, so it's important it's all available to us. Plus, put up for debate and looked at by the public's gaze, because there's a lot more to be gained from taking on.